Greetings, everyone. I'm the Reverend Dr. Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute at Yale Divinity School. The YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's gathering entitled Passing on the Faith, Supporting Caregivers with the Process with Dr. Amy Adamczyk. If this is your first event with us, welcome. And if we are well known to you, welcome. We're delighted you are here. For our time today, Dr. Adamczyk will speak to us, and then we will have a brief Q&A session at the end of her presentation. We ask that you please remain muted throughout our time together, except when asking questions or during those Q&A sessions. We will also be monitoring the chat window, so if you have a question, please feel free to type it in there anytime. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce one of them who is here on the call with us and thank them for their work. The YMI falls under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education. So we have Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator for the center. Thank you, Megan, for being here, for all you do, and for who you are. If you are new to the YMI, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a free moment. That is yaleyouthministryinstitute.org. We have a whole array of resources on there. We have curricula for your youth, training modules for youth leaders, discussion forums. We have over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by the world's leading youth ministry experts. We have resources for things like anti-racism work, for youth working through mental health struggles, mission and outreach endeavors, links to other articles and materials. There's a lot on there, and all of that is available for free. So please do check that out when you can. This is our second gathering for this year's Lunch Lab series at the YMI. We invite you to also add Wednesday, November 5th to your calendars. On that date, we will welcome the Reverend Jairicus Collins to speak to us about how to foster and empower children in the work of enacting justice and equity. You can find a registration link for that gathering in the chat in just a moment. And all of our webinar efforts for this coming year are sponsored jointly by the YMI and the national setting of the United Church of Christ denomination. We're so grateful to have the UCC as our partners in this work. The UCC's Love of Children program, was awarded a $1.25 million grant through the Nurturing Children Through Worship and Prayer initiative by the Lilly Endowment. Through this program, the United Church of Christ has committed to an intentional 4-year-long program to research the state of children's ministry, to equip ministry leaders to make meaningful changes to include children in the life of their churches, to create resources and strengthen relationships among clergy and volunteers, and doing all of this for the benefit of our youngest members and friends. So today we have the Reverend Tyler Ung with us on today's webinar representing that program. Welcome, Reverend Ung. One such way the Love of Children is living out its purpose is through this partnership with us to create educational webinars throughout those 4 years around some of these most pressing areas in children's ministry. So some of the topics therein include things like childhood development, storytelling with children, tending to parents, kids in worship, trauma-informed ministry with children, and fostering justice work and prophetic action in young people. If you would like to hear more about that initiative, please visit the website. We'll put that in the chat as well. And now it is my pleasure to introduce all of you to Dr. Amy Adamczyk. Amy Adamczyk is the professor of sociology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the programs of doctoral study in sociology and criminal justice at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. Trained as a sociologist of religion, her research focuses on how different contexts, nations, countries, friendship groups, and personal religious beliefs shape people's deviant, criminal, and health-related attitudes and behaviors. She received her PhD in sociology from the Pennsylvania State University and holds MA degrees from the University of Chicago and the Graduate Center, Queens College. She completed her BA degree at Hunter College. Amy is also the recipient of the 2018 Outstanding Book Award from the International Section of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences for public opinion about homosexuality, examining attitudes across the globe. Her co-authored book, Handing Down the Faith, How Parents Pass Their Religion On to the Next Generation, was a finalist in Christianity Today's 2022 Book of the Year Award in the Marriage and Family category. In addition to her 2 books, she's published over 50 peer-reviewed articles in well-regarded journals like the American Sociological Review, Social Forces, Social Science Research, and more. Dr. Adamczyk, welcome. We are really honored and thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to be talking with you all today about a couple of chapters from my co-authored book with Christian Smith. And I have several slides to share with you as we go through this, which I'm just pulling up now. And before we get started and I start telling you a little bit more about that work and how it might be especially relevant to you, I just wanted to give you a little bit more about my own background. Jill has given you a wonderful overview of my scholarly work, but you might be curious, like, where am I at right now? I'm smack in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. So if you hear some cars go by or you hear some sirens, that's where we're at. I'm with the City University of New York, so I'm with both John Jay College and the Graduate Center. The Graduate Center is the place that gives all of our doctoral degrees, and this year I'm working very closely as the deputy officer of the PhD program in criminal justice. And John Jay College of Criminal Justice is located, if you know New York City, on the west side, so 59th Street and about 10th Avenue. I will say too, City University of New York is the largest urban university in the country because we're the largest, city in the country. And where that black dot is on your screen, that's where John Jay College is. So that's about where we're at today. I live not too far from there. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started talking about what you're all here to talk about, which is how you can better include your families and minister to your children in your congregations and in your organizations. And to do that, I'm going to talk with you about a couple of chapters from this book that I wrote with Christian Smith. As Jill mentioned, I was trained as a sociologist of religion. All of my work, for the most part, has to do with religion. There's a very close relationship between religion, deviance, and crime. So that's also in part why I'm in this space that's called criminal justice, criminology, deviance related work. We won't talk too much about that today, though we certainly can another time. And today, I want to tell you about three chapters, or talk with you about kind of the key ideas in the three chapters that I co-authored with Christian Smith. We're going to talk about chapter 2, parent religiousness, parenting styles, and intergenerational religious transition. We'll talk about chapter 6, the influence of parents' experiences growing up. And then we'll get to chapter number 7, which has to do with congregations. And I devote a lot of time to talking about the role of congregations. And that's also the chapter that you likely read if you got some pre-reading material. I included that particular chapter. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to first talk about the research methods and the data. I want you to know that the findings that you're going to be hearing about today aren't just ideas that me and Chris came up with, but it's very much embedded in empirical research. And so we did a lot of research across the nations. I'm going to tell you a little bit, or across the United States. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that right now. And then I'm going to talk about some of the key findings. And I think these findings are going to be especially relevant to you and the parents and the kids that you're working with. So I'll talk about parental closeness, two-way communication and strictness, what parents want to pass on and how. Then we'll move into a discussion about congregations and the context of parenting, why parents rely so much on themselves, how congregations are useful to parents, and then we'll move into the conclusion. And I have some good discussion questions. So as we're going through this, I'm going to be, hoping that you'll engage me at the end of this, and maybe together we can come up with some even better ideas about how to move forward, given what you now know about the empirical work on these linkages. Okay, so first off, previous work, data, and methods. All right, so why did we do this? Well, at the time when we were figuring out what we wanted to do, we knew this. We knew that there was very little research examining how parents influence the role of religion in their young people's lives. We knew a lot about the young people themselves because Christian Smith had written several books in this area. I had done a number of journal articles. And so we knew a lot about the young people, both as adolescents and teenagers and then moving into their 20s. But we really didn't understand what role parents had. And we wanted to hear their voices and we wanted to get a sense of what is it that they're trying to do. We also wanted to get a little sense of what was successful. And I'll talk about all of those things with you here. So that was the motivation behind this. We knew a lot about the young people. We really didn't know that much about the parents. And so then we said, okay, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to, figure out what's going on in America? And we do this through two ways. One, and this was really innovative and it's actually quite hard to do because it requires so much manpower. And that is we interviewed over 250 mothers and fathers across the United States. Now you may be thinking, oh my God, Amy Adamczyk, you interviewed 250 people. Not quite. We had a wonderful research team. So they helped us do the interviews. I did do a lot of the interviews. Chris did a lot of the interviews, but we had other people that were a part of our team, doctoral students, postdocs. We had an army of undergrads who helped us transcribe and code all of the interviews. We also had an oversample of Spanish-speaking individuals from Catholic churches, especially across the southern part of the United States. And so that was really useful as well, because that's a big part of, America religion today. Now, you may be wondering, well, where did you, find these people? We really, at least initially, wanted to talk to people who could talk about religion. So that meant that we couldn't just grab a random sample of people because some people may not be religious and they have no idea what we're talking about. But we needed people who were thinking about these things, that had something to say about the topic. And so we went to congregations first and we reached out to congregations and said, hey, could you give us some information on people who might be willing to talk to us? And, if they're more religious or even moderately religious, that's completely fine with us. And then we ended up talking with those parents, with those families. A lot of times we would interview both the mother and the father, if if it was a single parent family, or I mean, we interviewed all kinds of people. But if we could, we tried to interview both of the people that were sort of in charge of raising the children. I also wanted to point out that we tried to get parents who didn't have like babies or like 4-year-olds. And there was a really good reason for that. I have a 4-year-old, and right now I can pretty much tell him most things of what to do. He mostly agrees. But I know that once you start to get preteens and teenagers, it's not like that anymore. It's much more of a negotiation. So we wanted to get parents who were in a situation where they really could talk freely about these issues, and that it wasn't like, oh, someday I'll do blah blah blah. It was like, no, what are you doing right now when your kid doesn't want to go to church? And then okay, let me think about last week. So we wanted people who were really in the sort of the throes of this situation. We also relied on a lot of survey data. We didn't collect the survey data ourselves. There's a lot of data that has been generated out there and it's deposited in various places. And so we can grab those survey data and look at that. And that really helped to triangulate some of our findings and also add context and help us understand too how this fits within the United States more generally. Once we did interview those 250 parents that were coming through congregations, there was a moment where we realized that we really also wanted to talk to parents who weren't religious. And so we went back and interviewed another 20 parents who weren't religious because we were curious, hey, how do these things work in families that aren't religious? Is it the same processes? And it's really just about handing down values and morality and tradition and all of these things. So that's why we went back and tried to talk to these other parents, which was wonderful. So we got even more context. One of the things I want to note too, as I go through these findings across different religions, many of the findings about how parents transmit religious belief are similar. So we talked to all kinds of parents. So we talked to Hindu parents, Buddhist parents, Jewish parents, all kinds of Christian parents. And you may be thinking like, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me because I am, X. Well, don't worry. A lot of times the same thing affects all parents. That it was a lot of the same processes. That was something that we looked for in our analysis. Like, oh, does this play out differently amongst some groups than others? There were some differences. If you might be familiar with some of these differences. So the biggest difference is going to be between what we call the strict religions that make a lot of demands on people. So this often includes conservative Protestants, people from those denominations, people from the historically Black church, Mormons, and Muslims. Now, when those differences do come up, I'll note them. So you'll kind of know like, oh, this is maybe more relevant to certain types of congregations, maybe less relevant to Catholics or something along those lines. But in general, a lot of what we found was consistent. Parents are parents, and they often, it was amazing how much similarity there was in how they were, what they were trying to do, and how they were thinking about these issues. Okay, so now you know a little bit about the data, where I'm going to be coming from, and then I'm going to give you some findings related to both the survey data, and then also we'll contextualize them with the interview data. So you can see like, okay, so what do the parents actually say, and how does that come out? That's sometimes a little bit more interesting. So dominant theme throughout these interviews when we were doing this research is the parents' own experience growing up. And so we wondered, what are the similarities and differences between adult children and their parents and their child rearing style? So when we talked to parents, they often reflected on where they were at. So they thought about like, well, when I was a kid, this is what my mom did with me. When I was a kid, this is what my dad did with me. And then they had to sort of, do this mental twisting to think about, hey, how do I want to now deal with my kid, right? Now that I get to be in charge, how are we going to go, forward with that? Well, one thing that we found is that when we talk to parents about closeness, and this is going to be an important theme and something I hope we'll continue to talk about. The interesting thing, and maybe you could guess this, but this is what we find in the data, that of the people who say that they were very close when they were growing up with their fathers, those are the same people who say that they feel very close to their children now. So you can see there's a linkage there between being very close. So you were raised and you say you're close to your mom, you say you're close to your dad, you're more likely to be close with your kids. There's probably some emulation that is happening there. And so adult children who were very close with their mothers or fathers tended to self-report feeling very close with their children now. And this closeness translated into feelings that their parents were a positive role model. So if they're feeling very close, they're also kind of looking at their parents and being like, hey, that was a good role model. All right. And then they're going to be like wanting to emulate some of that. So that's really important, I think, for how we think about parents and transmitting religious belief. So I'm gonna unpack that a little bit more. So this is the percentage of people reporting that they were close or distant with their fathers and wanted to emulate them. So 55% of people who said they were very close to their fathers said that the way I was raised is mostly a positive model of parenting, much of which I'm trying to do now with my own children. So if you have that close and tight relationship, it's what you want to do as you move forward. So we also found the same thing with mothers. It's a little bit less for mothers. I wonder what's going on there, but it's the same kind of thing. 50% say that, hey, if you were close to your mother growing up, that often is that you want to do that with your own children. So adult children who had a close and warm relationship with their parents wanted to transmit similar values. Here's a good quote from one of the people we interviewed. She says, so just growing up in that type of close family environment and the structuring with God in our household has led me to believe that I'm going to do the same for my family. So you can see a little bit about how that linkage is working. Now, you may be wondering, hey, either one, I didn't have a close relationship with my parents, so what does that mean for how I parent? Or two, what's going on with all those other parents, right? So 50% of them it said that they wanted to emulate their parents, but the other 50% said, no, no way, no way am I going to emulate my parents. So here's one mother from the Black Protestant Church. She says, my parents did not have the knowledge or education to direct me in the right direction, to be able to do something that I can absolutely say I love. It's important for me that we provide my children with more guidance. Another mother, she was wonderful. She was in a same-sex relationship, and I still remember this interview. She says I grew up with zero boundaries, zero. I had no bedtime. Nobody bathed me. Nobody said you stink. Go take a bath. I just don't know what the hell was happening because we're so attentive to our children. So you can see like parents are either kind of grabbing on to what happened before them, or they're like, no, let me rethink this. Let me figure out how else I'm gonna do this because that isn't gonna work. So nearly all of the parents interviewed said that they reflected on and evaluated how they were raised for raising their children. So we'll talk more about this, but it's really important, I think, to think about that for parents. That if you want to minister to them and help them, meeting them where they're at is probably a really good place to start. So, thinking through like, well, how are you doing this? And what are you grabbing onto or pushing away as you move forward? Okay, two-way communication and strictness. So I said parents reflected a lot, right? Parents are thinking about their own upbringing. They're thinking about what they want to do with their children. So then the question is, well, what exactly are they reflecting on? What are the themes that are kind of coming up? And so we spent a lot of time analyzing those 250 interviews, and we're poking around for themes. We're looking for who keeps saying this, or do I have 10 parents that are all saying this over and over and over again? Because that might really mean something for us or help us understand something. And I definitely did. So we had two big themes that popped up repeatedly. One was the communication style. So I'm going to unpack this for you. And the second relates to strictness and punishment. So both of those are popping up a lot, and it has implications for religious faith transmission. And you may see yourself in some of these quotes. You may be like, oh my God, that's so how I grew up. So, okay, two-way communication. So about 25% of the people that we talked to had genuine two-way communication. That's not great, but for them, it's great. For the other people who didn't have that, for me, I didn't have that. It's less great. All right, so here's one who says, my mother was a real scholar. This is somebody I interviewed. I remember this person. My mother was a real scholar of the gospel, so we grew up talking about the gospel all the time. Hopefully, I'm leaving that same impression on my children. So this is a Mormon mom. Another one, this is a Muslim father. He says there's little communication. So about 25% of parents said little communication. He said, well, while my religious views have not changed, I have conversations with my kids as opposed to my parents where they just dragged us to mosque. I want my kids to think more. So here you can see this dad saying, there just wasn't much there. There wasn't much, to grab onto. And then there's another style, and again, you might feel this way. They say, look, 50% of the parents they felt this way. Communication or one-way conversations. They say, when I say that my dad never spoke to me as a father, and he clears his. He says he spoke to me as a pastor. The discussion would be, well, that's not what Christians believe, so that's wrong. This is someone who was a conservative Protestant. So I think I would say I had the latter. I think my parents wanted to talk to me, but it was a one-way conversation. It was them telling me about stuff, not meeting me where I think I needed to be. All right, so the vast majority of parents talked about wanting to have genuine two-way conversations with their children. And so this idea of how do we do this, like one way versus two way, how does that come into play? That was all over our interviews. And then the second idea that was all over the interviews was about strictness. And I can, especially becoming a parent now, I can really appreciate how parents think about strictness and how strict to be, how they navigate those boundaries. So 65% of parents told us that their parents had been strict. So some liked it. So some parents said, "Oh yeah, absolutely. That's this is how you have to be." So here's one Black Protestant mother. She said, I think parents should whoop, not chastise, but whoop a kid. People are they abusing them? But I certainly think this leads to a better person. So they're very strict in that regard. And another one says, I was raised with everything so strict. So here she's pushing back. She's pushing back again. There's no joy in anything. It was all about making sure that was done correctly to the strictest letter of the law. She says she and her partner, you heard from her partner earlier in this slide presentation. She says together now, they're trying to just make things much more enjoyable for their three sons. So it was just too much. It was like, well, if we're going to pass on this religion, I don't think we should necessarily do this by just pounding it into the kids. So different parents, different styles, right? So that's hugely important to think about. So here's a good question. How does being raised in a strict environment shape later parenting styles? This is something we also looked at. So here again is some of the survey data. Our strictest parents often did want to emulate strictness. All right. So what this is here is just saying 55 percent, or excuse me, 54% of parents who were strict then are strict now. That was kind of the category that kind of went across it. The more permissive parents actually wanted to be stricter. So the people who grew up in more permissive homes later on said, no, 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 with my own kids, I need to be stricter. I need to move in these things. So we also find, and I'm going to talk more about this in just a minute, but strict parents are more successful at passing on their parenting approach to their adult children than more permissive parents. So that I think as communities of faith, you kind of want to think about like how strictness enters into transmitting, how you go forward with that, if depending on if that's what parents want to do, or, or whatever the context is. So let me talk just briefly about parenting style so you kind of can see how this fits together. We looked at parenting styles. So there's 4 basic parenting styles, and you can probably see yourself in some of these. It's the authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and passive. And then we look to see, let me see if I can go down, which one was like kind of, I don't want to say more successful, but more successful at passing on religion several years down the line. And so this figure that you see in front of you has the 4 different parenting styles laid out. And the authoritative one, which I'll unpack for you more here in just a minute, that was the one that was most successful. So people who were parenting with an authoritative approach, they were more successful at having kids who down the line, this is way for data later, once these people are, young people are now in their 20s, once the children are now in their 20s, they were more successful at still saying that religion was important in their lives. So I'm not saying you always have to do this parenting style. We're just finding that that seems to be pretty useful. So what is authoritative parenting style? It's the twofolds of both being demanding and strict, but also having lots of emotional warmth. So these are the parents that are very much involved in their kids' lives. There are clear boundaries around them. There are there are things they can and cannot do. But when something goes wrong, and of course it always at some point it does go wrong, these are not parents who are gonna turn away from their kids. These are the parents who are going to kind of come back and like, okay, let's regroup. Let's talk about it. We are strict, but we love you. And now we're going to do hugs and lots of warmth. The contrast to that is the authoritarian style. This was the style I was raised in. So my parents were very demanding and strict, but they were much colder and distant as well. So very strict, lots of rules, everything's going on. When you did break them, you kind of felt devastated, and there wasn't always going to be a lot of coming back to that. We also had a lot of parents, talked to a lot of these parents that were very permissive, especially this day and age. That's a pretty popular style. So lots of closeness and empathy. I fear this may become me with my child, but no, I'm going to hold on to my strictness as well. But they just didn't have a lot of boundaries. So the kids sort of didn't know what was expected of them, or how this is supposed to go, or where are the where do I stop? So that okay, not so successful. And then finally, the passive. So these are parents who don't know the names of their children's friends, maybe not the name of the teacher. They don't have much affection or warmth. It's just like there's not much of anything there. So not the affection and warmth, but also not the standards and the strictness. Authoritative style, it has both that strict piece to it. So there's boundaries. You do have to go to church on Sunday, or you do need to participate in this activity, or we do want you to, do this various things. There are boundaries, there are penalties, but there's also just an incredible amount of warmth and love and caring. So these are children who know their parents care deeply. They also know that there are high standards because they care. There are consequences when you don't meet them, but the parents don't withdraw. So when it doesn't go well, it's not like, well, mommy's mad at you now, da, da, da. It's more like, okay, now there is a punishment, but okay, let's deal with this, and let's talk about it, and let's regroup, and we're fully in. We're on board. We're here. We're talking to you. We're engaged. So adult children liked their parents. So I mean, part of this is you want to have a parenting style that I think that children, when they grow up, that they still care for, that they want to be close. You don't want to turn them off, so they don't want to have anything to do with the parents, right? That's not good. But if they know they have to engage in various things related to religion, there are expectations and demands, and there's also lots of love. Both of those things sort of move forward a continuing on of the faith because the kids, one, like their parents, but then two, also know that you do have to do things. It's not just a kind of a free for all. So that I would say provides some insight into why we find these differences. So people who say, "Oh, this was an authoritative family," 10 years later, these kids are more likely to say that, "Oh, religion is extremely important in their lives." If you want to know more about some of the other factors that shape children saying that religious faith is extremely important later in their lives, take a look at the book, or say I'll send you chapters. I don't think, please let me know if there's anything that I can provide and we can unpack more like, okay, what is going on there? Okay, so what do parents want to pass on and how? Okay, so let's kind of look at that. I think that's important. So again, you know where your parents are at and what's going on. So first off, what do parents want to transmit? There's three things, and I'm going to unpack each of these. So similar religion to the one in which they were raised, religious service attendance, prayer, singing in the choir. So those types of engagement, and a lot of parents, and this again, this is a good question for you guys. Moderate religion. We had a lot of parents say they only want to pass on moderate religion, not a lot of religion, not too little religion, like right down the middle. So interesting findings. I was surprised by that. So okay, first off, let's talk about the religious transmission. What do they want to pass on? Number one, the same religious tradition. So this came up over and over again. It was almost like cultural identity, or this is just like who we are. So I want that to continue. That's the kind of discourse we heard from a lot of parents. So here's one Catholic mother. She says, "My personality is loyal. Like I've been with this company for 23 years. So so that's how I am about my religion. It all goes back to the pleasing thing. I never wanted to let my parents down." And then here's another one. He says, when asked whether he had ever considered changing parishes, a Hispanic Catholic father says, "No." He says, "This is what we do. This is the belief of my father, my mother, and my town. They say we should go here. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it." So most people wanted to pass on the same faith tradition. That said, there were few parents, I would say, I didn't interview any of these, who felt so strongly about passing on the religion that they would end the relationship with their child. I didn't see that. So it's important to pass on their religious faith, but unlike from maybe 50 or more years ago, these parents were not going to, this was not going to be the last stand they took. They were not going to put everything on this and be like, "And if you're not the same religion, you're out of the family." We didn't, that was not the mentality at all. All right. So then the question is what are the like kind of practices? What's that kind of stuff like? So parents talked a lot about wanting to pass on religious attendance, prayer, and singing in the choir. They felt that these really helped to lay a foundation for religiously inspired values and moral character. So they wanted to pass that on. That was often important to them. So here's somebody from the Black church, and he says, "It wasn't like she was forcing us to go to church, but we just knew it was the right thing to do. And she did teach the value in us. Church attendance is important because it's just right to have that value instilled in you." So lots of parents grabbing onto religion because they're hoping it's going to instill values. Here's another one from this is a Black Protestant mother. She said, "We always knew that we would be passing down our faith. It would be bad if religion wasn't in the household because we teach our kids to pray, to know right from wrong, and to know the Lord Jesus Christ." All right. Finally, the thing I want to have a focus group with all of you about, what is going on here? Moderate religion. This is what we also found. So many parents, they sort of saw religion as useful in part because it made their children's lives better. But if you had too much of it or you had too little of it, they got worried that this was going to become problematic for the children. They very much kind of see religion as helping them when you need it, but don't overdo it. Don't become an extremist. My God, don't become a pastor. It's too much. We don't, and you don't make enough money. That kind of mentality. which again is very surprising for me. So here's what they said. For some, this had been their experience. As a Catholic father said, similar to his own upbringing, he was not expecting his children to say a lot of prayers or read scripture. Rather, he simply wanted to show them, hey, this is who we are. So again, a little bit like that cultural identity, I think. For others, they were pushing back against their upbringing. So they were worried that their children would stray. And so here's a Catholic mother. She said, I think part of why I rebelled when I did, as far as the church was that it was seen as you're going to church no matter what. And so she pushed back against it. So this again is another reason that they're putting down moderate religion. They don't want to alienate. They really like their kids. I'm going to talk in just a minute how much parents today they really like their kids. They don't want to alienate them, and they're worried about this. So I think that's an important thing. There was a little distinction in terms of the conservative Protestant and the Mormon and Muslim parents. They were a little less interested in transmitting moderate religious faith. So that came up less. This came up a lot more with Jews, mainline Protestant denominations, and Catholics. So a lot with Catholics. So many things to be said about that. Then the strategy for transmitting faith. We wanted to know how are parents doing this? Like, what are they actively thinking about it? And so there's kind of maybe 2 or 3 ways that you can try to transmit religious faith to their children. First, you can be very deliberate, right? What did you learn in church today? Or what did you hear in Bible study? Or, we stopped by a church. What do you think is going on? Like very deliberate with the questions. And we found about 60% of parents were trying to be deliberate. I also had some parents talk about osmosis. So it was just a much more subtle thing. So it wasn't so much like you were intentionally trying to, instill religion in them, but it was more like, hey, I'm gonna, read my Bible in a public place, or not public, but not in my bedroom. I'm choosing to do it in the living room so that my kid sees me doing it, right? So it's this more subtle process. And then there was about 30% gave a mixture of both. So here's one of the intentional religious socializers. This is from a Catholic mother. She says, she's coming to church. She laughs. My house, my rules. That's how my mom did it, and that's what I'm gonna do. I was drugged to church. They were drugged. That's how I'm gonna do it. Says Catholic mother. I had a Black Protestant father say something very similar. Osmosis. So here's another. This was kind of neat. It's a really interesting quote from this Catholic father who was talking about NPR. He says, growing up, one of my favorite memories was the drive home from church with the Irish radio program on NPR, which I now do with my kids, which is pretty awesome. The exact same one. And then the critiques of the sermon. And he laughs because we're like always critiquing the sermon. So again, this is osmosis because it's not directly trying to instill religion into your kids. It's much more subtle. It's like, well, the radio station is on in the background. So, that's also just signaling to them that this is what's going on. Oh, here's the Black Protestant mother. She says, my father would sit downstairs and read his Bible for hours. And she does that now. So she doesn't it's not hide, but she doesn't like go to like her bedroom and close the door. It's like, oh no, let me sit in the living room. Let me be in a place where my kids can see me doing this. So about 30% had a mixture of both. So as we are brainstorming about how to help parents, I think it's useful to know about these different techniques, and certainly intentional religious socializers, that's the dominant one, but there is this other idea of osmosis, and how do you create an environment where that may be going on. Okay, so children's strain, I've mentioned this already. There were a lot of parents who were really nervous about this. I totally get it. It really makes sense. So 80% thought it was actually natural for them to want to stray. They didn't like it, but and again, no parents were willing to end the relationship because of it. But it was something that came up. It was a part of the discourse in the interviews. So we asked them, how might you handle this? What would you do? And a lot of them said that they would try to emulate their own parents. But some, of course, said, that what they did, they didn't like. So then they would, they were going to push back against it. So, here's a Catholic father saying, we never told them they had to believe, because I think part of why I rebelled from the church was because my parents said, this is what you're going to do. you're going to church. And so he said, I don't want to do that to my kids. I don't want to alienate them. We're much more, again, that lukewarm, that moderate level of religion, like not too much, don't, not too much. All right. So, adult children who were very close with their parents tended to self-report being very close with them now. The most successful parents in terms of passing on religious belief, you might be successful in many other ways, but in terms of passing on religious beliefs, they were more religious than the others. They talked to their children about religion, but they also had this authoritative parenting style. So you're mixing that strictness with that warmth. It's that, both pieces are there. Uh, Most popular themes, communication style. So again, I think that'll be useful for a lot of you, and just thinking about how your parents communicate with you, and then how parents are now communicating with their own children. Strictness and punishment, everybody was trying to kind of figure out that line, what they found acceptable, what they weren't, how much would be good, and how much wasn't. And then again, that moderate level of religious belief, and then the mixture of osmosis and attentional approaches for thinking about how to pass religion on to the next generation. So next, I'm going to turn now to talking about congregations. So congregations play a really key role, and I think there's a lot of great things congregations can do. Parents talked a lot. We made parents talk about congregations. So we asked them all kinds of questions about congregations, and we wanted to know what was helpful, what's not helpful, how do they see congregations, how do they use congregations, and so forth. So first off, let me tell you a little bit about the context of parenting today. Some of this, I think, actually, you guys know better than me. But very interesting, a lot of changes have happened since the 1960s. One of those big changes is that there's been a massive rise in the proportion of couples that are both working outside of the home. So it was 25% in 1960. Today, it's about 60%. So parents are very busy, often both working outside of the home, not always, but often are. And also there's been a bit of a decline of the two-parent household, going from about 87% in the 1960s, dropped to about 69% in 2014, which is where these data end. So you may be thinking like, oh, wow, parents are really working a lot. And in some cases, there are parents that are raising their kids on their own. There may be a single parent households. So I bet they're not spending a lot of time with their children, right? You would be wrong. Parents today spend massive amounts of time with their children. I'm learning this as a new mother as well. They really like their kids. They really put a lot of time into it. So here it is. In 1965, mothers on average spent about 10 hours a week with their kids. Dad spent about 2 hours. 2010s again, where my data happened to end. I think it has continued to go up. Mothers were spending 13 hours, so 3 more hours, and dads are tripling their very small contribution. So things have changed. So parents are really spending a lot of time with their kids, despite being dual income earners, right? A lot of people are working outside of the home. It's I don't call it a luxury or a challenge of the 1960s, but the times have changed from that then. Today, and this doesn't go for everybody. I know there's a lot of exceptions to this, and there might be a lot of exceptions to this in your own congregations, but this is sort of what we see on average. Parents really like spending time with their children. They're very invested in their children. A lot of times, parents will have higher levels of education, start having kids, so that changes their dynamic and what they want to instill in their children. They often have kids later in life, so that changes some of the norms and values. It becomes more child-centric. They've often, in some cases, gone, very much planned out when they're having kids and have focused on that. There's a lot of concern about children's safety, so that's changed things. That's changed the level of supervision. Children spend a lot less time in unstructured activity with other kids. So as some of you may know, there's a lot of bringing them to various activities and dropping them off and picking them up. That changes the dynamic. It's not so loose anymore. It's a very structured activity, but it also then means for some parents, there's a lot more time to talk to their kids. And so that could be a plus And that might create a nice opening for some of the stuff that you want to talk to parents about, because that if there's more dialogue, maybe in the car or in other places, then there's maybe more opportunity. Okay, so to what extent do parents rely on themselves versus their congregations given this context, given the context of parents being very busy but wanting very much to spend a lot of time with their kids on average? Again, this is on average. What we found is parents see themselves as number one responsible for passing on religion to their children. So if you had an antiquated model about like the 1960s and you drop the kids off at the front door and you wave to them and say, I'll pick you up in an hour and a half, we just aren't seeing it that way anymore. And here's what some of the parents told us. So here, this is a mother from the Black church. I think parents are more important because the kids need to see you practicing what you say. They can see other people, but if their own parents are doing it, I think it's more effective. Here's another one, mainline Protestant father. It starts at home. At home, my kids learned our Father prayer. It's not like they learned it in church and then they came home. We're in charge. And here's a Mormon dad. I think I don't think the congregation's sole purpose is to help us as parents. They're not supposed to raise our children. So I had almost no parents. I would say I don't think I interviewed a single parent that said that they largely relied on congregations to transmit religious belief to their children. It was very much that they are in relationship with congregations. Why do they rely so much on on themselves? And I'll talk about these three reasons. I'll unpack them a little bit more. One, they often felt reasonably comfortable talking about religion. So these are more educated parents. These are parents that are comfortable discussing things. They're used to having good conversations and dialogue in a way that maybe it wasn't so easy to come by in the 1960s. Secondly, these were also parents who sometimes questioned their faith. And they had trouble reconciling inconsistencies. And because of that, they wanted very much to have the big hand on their children. They didn't want to just leave them off at the congregation's door and be like, good luck, who knows what you'll teach them, or I know, whatever, they struggled themselves. And so they wanted to be very much involved in the congregation. And then finally, this is maybe a little bit obvious, but I think really useful to just remember. A lot of times, parents are picking congregations for very practical reasons. So it's not like they're going out and being like, tell me all the best congregations in America and I'll pick my favorite. They're more like, look, what's nearby? What can work with our schedule? Let's figure it out. I want them to engage with religion. Am I willing to drive 2 hours to find that ideal congregation? Maybe that's just not practical. And so that too means they're going to rely a little bit more on themselves because they haven't like carefully, found out the exact congregation that's going to teach their child the things they want to teach them in the way that they want to teach them. All right, so parents, again, I'll unpack this a little bit and then I'll move into what they really liked about congregations. So first, parents feel relatively comfortable talking about religion. So here's a mother from the traditional Black church. She said, we're very open about talking about what happens to the body. To be absent from the body is to be present with God. So they understand that because I've talked to them about that, about repenting. And another one says, oh, I really clean the house around Passover. And I do that also to transmit that to my children, that they see it and we talk about it. So parents, at least certainly the ones we interviewed, they very much were doing things in faith and they felt they were being very purposive about it. So here's another mother from the Black church, and she added, she studies the Bible at home where her son can see her. So doing it, in this case, it's in the bedroom, but her son does see her doing it. Again, parents felt comfortable with it. Again, parents struggled with their own faith, so they questioned it. They were huge. These parents are really involved in everything in their kids' lives. It's not just religion. It's soccer and school and all the extracurricular activities and their friends and so forth. So a lot of these parents, it was just another piece of it. Like, well, okay, what exactly are we doing with regards to religion? So they weren't especially trusting of any institution. And then proximity was really important. So again, Catholics traveled the least to get to their parish, but that's in part because They usually are asked to go to the local parish. Conservative Protestants, which also included the traditional Black church, they would often go a little further, maybe and that might relate to culture, that might relate to some other things as well, to get to a congregation where they really felt comfortable. The point being that proximity was important. So I think that's important for church leaders to know. So here's one conservative Protestant father just lamenting, like, we were driving 45 minutes each way and we found ourselves missing more than going, and we decided it was time to find a church that was local. So another one says, and he explained that when they first moved to the area, we had no idea where we were going to the church, so we looked up the name of the town, found it on a church website. It didn't seem far, so we just picked it. So again, just picked it from the church website. So parents are practical when they select congregations. It may not be ideal, but it's good enough, but they're going to be involved, right? Because it isn't necessarily ideal. Uh, I will say that, even though parents may be picking congregations based on practicality, they were quite happy with their congregations. So that's a shout out to the congregations and the parents who had younger children were actually even more pleased. So parents who had children under the age 18, that's those blue bars on your screen. They were even more happy than other people. And I will say too, the conservative Protestant congregations, a lot of sociological research about why those particular congregations are often I mean, I'm going to say successful, but I know religious belief in general in America has been declining, but conservative Protestants are sort of holding on there a little bit more than mainline Protestants and Catholics. So that's why you see even higher bars for them. So parents, it's not so much that they're so mad at their congregations or whatever. They may not be using them as much as they used to, but there's some really good, I would say, even practical reasons for why they may not be. But we had all kinds of things about how congregations were helpful, and I want to go over those because those are the strengths. Those are things that I think really can be built upon for religious leaders. If they know what parents are sort of going to them for, then you can kind of, okay, this is one of the things we are known to do well. So let's capitalize on that. One is religious education. So parents talked about religious education as being something valuable that congregations provided. They often were talking about the nuts and bolts, and they appreciated that because parents were smart and they could talk to their kids about various aspects of religion, but they weren't going to necessarily like homeschool them on certain things. So they appreciated that congregations were there. They really liked often the religious education that young people, their children were getting. They also liked the religious sermons. They said that was neat because it helped them engage their children. So when they were done with the sermon, going home on Sunday afternoon or whatever, you could say, "Hey, what did you learn?" Or "What do you think the point of the sermon was?" Or "Did you think that was interesting when they said blah blah blah?" So it kind of gave like another learning mechanism that was a little bit different than what it would be otherwise if they didn't have the congregation there providing some of that material. So just a couple of quotes just to drive that home. So here's a mother from the traditional Black church. She says, "It's a place for them to get an extended lesson on God." Another one says, "We like the curriculum where the kids understand what the Trinity is and that God has always been here. Christ didn't just come in the New Testament." So kind of knowing that history was important. And then a Muslim mother, she liked, "Look, I want that old school hardcore, where my children can take Quran lessons, for example, and they take it at the local Islamic center." So she's going, "I want that old style thing that I may not be instilling in them, or for various reasons." Congregations were also really important for instilling right and wrong. So again, morality. So congregations, they often thought that could help them. You get a good moral foundation with religious education. They talked about it making them good people, giving them a moral compass, make good decisions. So these are the things that parents really liked. So when they thought about congregations, like, oh yeah, that's what we want. That's where we want to go with that. Here's a Muslim mother. She just says, "We want them to be good people." A Hispanic Catholic father says, "They need to be good men for the future." Another one says, and when responding to the question, what would happen if religion was removed? She says, I feel like maybe my kids wouldn't be on the right track because there are so many temptations. So it's a little bit of a toolkit to help them in life, is to have this strong religious foundation that can help them move forward in morally responsible ways. All right, what else did they like? Congregations bring on the fun activities. More than half of the parents we interviewed told us that their children liked to attend religion-related functions. This was a little surprising to me. I didn't know that. And that was sort of neat. We see that in the young people's data too. Kids often will say they do like going to religion functions. And it's part of it is it made it fun. It was cool. So, here's one mother from the traditional Black church. She says, oh, they understand going to church because they ask, are we going to Bible study? Are we going to Wednesday nights? Yes, we're going. And so they're really cooperative. They really like it. Another Catholic mother, she says she likes her daughter likes going to church. This was a Mormon mom. She was really neat. But she was telling me about how every morning her daughter gets up and this is like her thing. She goes to this like 6 a.m. mass and really likes going. It's like her special thing. So again, congregations, it's great. Those activities are really important. Some often parents have to skip activities. I think the most important reason is probably just that extracurricular activities. I didn't know either that they schedule all kinds of activities on Sundays. What? Or on Saturdays if you're Jewish. Like what? Why? Why are they scheduling all these non-religious things on these days? But they do, and so there is that, and parents are highly engaged with their children. So if there's really important extracurricular activities, they will sometimes skip. It's always a kind of a scheduling challenge to bring all of that together. And so parents, I mean, they didn't like skipping, but they're so involved in their kids' lives, and they have them doing so many things, and they spend so much time with them. This was, something that came up. All right, what else did they like? Opportunities to meet other kids. A lot of parents talked about their children having friends at church that really helped them, or in the congregation. It helped the parents get the kids to the congregation if there were friends there. They also liked that it would channel their children into friendship groups that they approved of. I have some great conversations about with one. I remember one dad in particular, Mormon dad, telling me about how he really wished his congregation had more opportunities for his son to date. He was getting very frustrated, and he was about ready to go over to the local Muslim congregation because he said, well, they have similar values, so why can't they date each other? So parents appreciated that you could channel your children into certain networks with the hope that they would then develop a friendship group that you value, that you would appreciate the values that were in those friendship groups. So here's one Catholic father. He says, she has this little group of friends, and it turns religion into a social gathering. So much fun for the kid. Here's another one. She's like, oh, my kids are willing to attend mass without me, but I think it's mostly because they want to see their friends. And then another one said they should start attending at the age of 2 because that's when they develop their friends, their friendships, and their bonds. So, having friends in the congregation, that was really useful to parents. We asked about summer camp and volunteer activities. We didn't get a lot of input on that. It was really much more about maybe the more core opportunities offered within the congregation. All right. A lot of parents also talked about having this group that cares for their children, like another set of eyes, or like an alternative to the parents that young people could go to if they had a question or they needed help, but they didn't want to go to their parents. So it's kind of like a safe haven. So congregations and the parents thought these were different than those created through schools or extracurricular activity. Like there was something unique about the congregation and the values and the structure of it all. They also needed congregations to sort of show their children that their children are not outcasts, right? So we had some pretty religious parents, and they said, my kid feels weird, but at least in the congregation, they have a group of people that are similar to them. So that makes them feel more comfortable, even when they're not in the congregation. They know that I think she used the term weirdos. They're not weirdos. So that there are other religious families and that it's not just this strange thing our mom and dad are making us do. Uh, and also to meet people from different age groups, that was really important, another piece of that. So parents really appreciate it. So here's one. It says it gives her the safe, secure home. I mean, she's so comfortable there and she makes good, safe connections. Another one says that they provide a support network. Another a mother said, "Oh, it's because this is my extended family. Because I have been here so long, I've watched people grow up. So this is the community I feel safe in." So they very much appreciated that. Okay, so in summary, parents do not rely on congregations as much as themselves. They have a lot of choice over whether they want children. Parents who have kids tend to really want them. They want to be actively involved in everything they do. They often feel pretty comfortable with their religion and answering questions. And they often select congregations for very practical reasons. And because of that, they stay really heavily involved in them. What do congregations provide? They provide a religious education. So even though parents are knowledgeable, the congregations are able to provide more of the nuts and bolts or things that the parents aren't gonna do. So that kind of relieves the parents, right, from having to provide, okay, memorize this or do that. They make religious activities enjoyable. They channel them into friendship groups with other people that have similar values. They love the moral foundation. A community of people who look out for them, and often a shared culture and history. So for some of the religious groups that we focused on, this was a really important time for getting that shared cultural history that they may not get otherwise. And for others, it was more like, oh, well, I've just been a part of this organization for a long time, so I know the history, and I like seeing all of that come through. So, concluding thoughts: many factors shape parenting approaches and how to transmit religion. Parents think a lot about how they were raised. The parents, certainly all of the ones they're not blindly following what their parents did. They're also not blindly following what congregations tell them, right? They're very much thinking through everything and considering how does that relate to the what they were raised to do and whether or not they liked it. And at the same time, how does that fit into their life? What is useful? Maybe moderate levels of religious belief are more useful for a lot of these parents. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and open this up for discussion questions. We still have a little bit of time so we can talk about this. And I'm gonna ask if Jill can maybe help with this too as we move forward. So I have some discussion questions prepared. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen because maybe it's more useful so that everybody can see each other. To get things started, here's the first question. Thinking about your own childhood faith experience, what was one thing your parents or caregivers did that made faith feel meaningful to you? What was one thing that you wish they had done differently? How do you see the connection between what you liked and what you are now doing? So we'll start with that, and then we can move into other discussion questions. Also, if you have questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. Any questions related to the work that I just showed you.
Amy, thank you so much. Let's so there were a number of questions that came up in the chat as you were talking. I think, and I've sort of consolidated some of these. They sort of fit into two different categories. One is about the data, how you accumulated the data, how you categorize different things. So I have a slew of those things, and then some other more practical
It's a very bright
implementation
group.
questions. Yeah, yeah, very, very curious group. So do you want to start by answering the logistical research related stuff, and then perhaps we can move into the more practical
Mhm.
pieces as we go, and then get into your really lovely meaty discussion questions. All right, so a question about, did you track ethnicity demographics, including urban and rural? And can those demographics be shared, or is it in the book already? How do you?
Yeah. So there's the interviews themselves, and in the appendix of the book, you should see a bunch of demographic information. So there were certain, like when we realized we really tried to capture all five major religions, and then within those there were certain groups we oversampled. So we had to have people from the Black Protestant church. It's just a really important demographic in America. We we had to make sure we had enough Muslims. In the larger United States, Muslims are about less than 1% of the overall population. So if we just were to randomly select people, we wouldn't have had enough. So we did oversample for various groups to try to get enough of them, because we did want to kind of make commentary across religions, not just Christianity. So those demographics of the people we interviewed are in the appendix of the book. And if you have any trouble finding that, let me know. You're welcome to email me. I'm really easy to find online, and I respond quickly to email. And then we were able to supplement that with a whole bunch of survey data. So the survey data was really useful for kind of talking about America in general. And you can get some of that survey data yourself. So if you're curious, they're often in public depositories like the Association of Religion Data Archives and other ones. So even lay people can go on and do some basic stuff and be like, okay, how does this work?
Awesome. Thank you. Also a question about families who have parents perhaps of multiple faiths. Did that
Oh,
come up in your
yeah.
conversations?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I did more stuff on that. So we initially I mean, it was in there, but it wasn't something that was a big part of the book. And then we thought about it and realized like that people like you guys want to know this, right? Different faiths. So there is a section, I don't have the book right in front of me, but if you have the whole book, there is an area that talks about parents from different faiths. Whew, it's a challenge. That was especially when parents didn't always have access to the children, where they were really splitting the custody. If the other parent got it on a different day, they often didn't have a lot of recourse about making them go to various religion-related activities. So that ended up becoming a challenge, and parents, did their best to work through it. But there is some on that, because that was something that was important.
Awesome. Thank you. You also mentioned the race of some of your interviewees on your slides, but not others. Are we meant to assume a particular ethnicity or racial background if it was not listed there?
When we talk about the traditional Black church, a lot of times I'll say like a conservative Black Protestant, just because the conservative Black church is, I think, over 80% Black. So sometimes there's, and you can know in this political climate, there's some important differences, like including there's some important reasons why we often categorize the conservative Protestant church as different from denominations that are considered part of the Black church tradition. And one of the reasons relates to justice issues in the way they're looking at justice issues sometimes is quite different, but they're both pretty conservative. So if I
Yeah.
group them all together, I think we lose some of that nuance. And I think we lose some of that nuance when we don't think about how important the Black church might be for African Americans, in a way that I'm not sure, I have a Polish background, in a way that it maybe isn't in the same way. The importance isn't there. So, yeah. So I did point out that there for that reason. It's both a religion and a kind of racial ethnic connection. And same with the Hispanic population. If there were distinctions, we tried to break that away, because those congregations are different in part by linguistic style, but often by other challenges that those organizations may be experiencing, or that those individuals in those organizations are experiencing.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a caution in the chat also about, white can equal normative, right? And this is problematic. And these kinds of namings, when inconsistent, can reinforce that pattern. And that's the concern, I think. Um, let's see. Was there any particular, we're assuming that the 250 people interviewed is the base number for all the percentages that you named in your slides. Is that about right?
No, the slides have so the percentages in the quantitative data are coming from survey data. I don't know if they're referring to so sometimes we have survey data and sometimes we have interview data. So in the interview data, I tried to make clear if there was a percentage, and in the survey data, we tried to make that clear as well. And the book breaks it out, I think, pretty clearly.
Yeah, thank you. Did anything about neurodiverse children come up as you were going through this, and did that seem to play into any of the findings?
Just that, like anecdotally, it would come up, like maybe a parent was struggling, but it wasn't in general a dominant theme. We could and but we maybe we didn't ask that much about it. It wasn't as on our forefront, and then if it didn't emerge from our, we had a very long questionnaire. Again, it's in the book, in the back of the book. Uh, if the parents themselves didn't bring it up, I mean, it's not that it wasn't there, it's just it wasn't necessarily the focus of this particular project, or it would come up anecdotally, but not enough to have been a dominant theme.
Sure.
Good question. I don't know. Let's
Thank
get some
you.
funding.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right, right, right. Yeah. Okay, so I have moving on from some logistical considerations of numbers. So I have a question for you. It seems that parents genuinely care about passing on their faith to young people and their children and the folks they take care of, but it also seems as though they operate out of what they know, which is to say they repeat or they choose not to repeat what they experienced as children themselves. So, of course, as with so many things in self-reflection, it starts with family of origin. I wonder if we can, as practitioners, supplement that by offering additional starting places, perhaps with some thoughtful pedagogy that parents can then use in their homes. It occurs to me, for example, I'm making this up, bedtimes, right? We all grew up with a certain bedtime or not. We grew up with certain rhythms around when we were told to go to bed or not. And as parents, sometimes we routinely just fall into, well, this is what I did as a kid. But I think more often we think about that critically, right? And we think about, oh gosh, well, they have this activity and this consideration on Thursday nights, so bedtime might be different, et cetera, et cetera. By all that, I mean to say we don't just fall back into rote understandings of what a bedtime should be. And it sounds like you're hearing something similar from parents trying to pass on faith, that they're thinking critically about this. They're not just trying to cookie cutter repeat what they had as kids, though there's an element of that, or not. There's intentional thought there. So my question is, what are some other starting places that we can consider as we do this work with children? We know so much more now about how children learn than certainly folks did when I was a kid. School looks different for my children than it did when I was a kid. Why doesn't church school or faith formation or outside of Sundays, whatever that looks like in one's own church setting, why doesn't that look much different than it did when I was young? And that's a question. I don't know if anything like that came up in your research or if this is kind of pushing us a little bit into a realm of implementation that the research didn't open up.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I mean, I would love to know, what you guys think of that. Why didn't it change more, or what? Yeah, it's a great question. I will say that when things were going well for the parents, and they felt engaged with the congregations, and not everybody did, even though our initial list was from congregations. The church leaders could have sent us, if people were willing to do it, but it was coming through congregations. Uh, it often was because the churches were speaking to these various things that they had like the activities were so important. Like, come on, you gotta give us stuff they want to go to, or these communities. So when it did go well, it was because it was kind of following these things. But the historical reason for it, Jill, that's a great question. Why haven't they changed more? I think it's really hard to change, right? And you get used to certain things, and as you become church leaders in the organization, what your needs are as you get older may not be the same needs of everybody in the congregation, right? So you're kind of reverting to the mean or to the norms. So I think that's a challenge. I'll also put some of this on the congregations themselves. I saw a study one time that said that congregational leaders are often much more interested in engaging in various dialogues than the congregants themselves. So
Mm.
you have a congregation and there's everyone has different needs and it kind of reverts to the mean. And even if the leader is like, hey, no, let's think about this in more diverse ways. And they're often thinking in really creative ways, right? This is their thing. You have to, depending on the congregation, maybe you have to convince everybody to go along with it. And that's a challenge because they often are the ones that often put you in your position of power. So there's some interesting dynamics where you might want to change things, or you might have some ideas, and you bring them up and you're getting shut down. And then you're like, well, now we're going to end up not, providing opportunities for this other group. And if we don't do that long enough, we're not going to exist anymore. So I think it's maybe a challenge with a little bit with the structure. Not that we're going to change it, but it can be hard. And some of the various structures are very hierarchical, so there's more limits to how much you can change. What do you guys think? Let's yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Being a steward of innovation in a setting that still many of us still are very accustomed to things like pews and organs and extraordinarily old songs. That's not exclusive. That's not exclusively true. I'm painting with a broad brush here, but we use a lot of insider language, at least in my Christian church tradition. So that's an interesting conversation to think about. Gabriel, I see a hand. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, sure. This is just a comment about traditions and what you want to keep as traditions. So, my grandfather worked at the University of California, Berkeley, and was a pastor. So, when I go to the Yale Bible study, it's like I look at the Bible more of an academic study and how it relates to like grander things within the world. And I think that for me, within my family, that's something that I really appreciate because it's like, I can look back on how I can track and trace what he did at the university here and also what he did in the church and how it relates to biblical translation.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. So the conversation between academic and practical implementation, they might be two separate conversations. Can they talk to each other? Do they not? What are the goals of the people who enter those spaces? What are they looking for? These are really good salient questions. Amy, I know you prepared a lot of questions for us. Why don't we get to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see. Here's a good one. What do you want to do about the moderate? Here's my question. Many parents want to pass on moderate levels of religious commitment, avoiding both spiritual neglect and overwhelming intensity. What do you guys want to do with that? How do we support this while still fostering genuine faith formation? So this was surprising to me. I didn't really see this coming in the data. So we talked to these parents, and a lot of them say, "Look, I don't want to cause problems for my kid. I'm worried that if they become too religious, then that's not going to work out well for them. At the same time, I want them to have something. So we're just aiming for a moderate." Whereas I thought, at least when I was growing up, I thought, well, the more the better. Like it's like you throw your weight into this thing. Like you're supposed to really latch on and pull it and grab it. And so many of the
Yep,
parents much
yep,
more about kind of this moderate thing. And I'm guessing this is maybe a little bit of a, if people were to articulate it, be a little bit of a crisis. I don't want to call it a crisis, but how, and then you guys have to work with these parents, right? So
yeah.
you might be like, I've got all kinds of great stuff. I got all kinds of great idea. And they're like, hold on, too
Uh,
much, you
yep.
know, once in a while, we'll see you once a month.
I also want to lift up something Emily shared in the chat, which says, I also think parents feel conflicted about the amount of activities available for their child and time commitments. Kids I work with are so busy. Even if a kid shows a desire to be more active at church, I've had parents tell me they don't want to prioritize one activity over another, which often means they prioritize sports. So, yep, the constant struggle of time commitments and busy, and how to overschedule versus underschedule your child, how to give them that well-rounded balance, which often means they're dabbling in many things but are not deep within any. This is challenging. Yeah. Amy, in our remaining 5 minutes, thoughts on any of this?
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's really tricky in how to phrase this, and I don't think it's going to get too much easier. So, I think everybody knows about the religious violence that happened in Michigan a few days ago. More and more of this is coming up, and the society certainly it's very, there's a lot of divisions now. So I can speak a little bit of this. I do some research on crime and terrorism as well. And there's a concern amongst parents too that, like, oh, I overdo this, then they're going to become that. Or, a lot of the parents, when we talked to them, very much talked about religion as an accessory. Like, you pick it up and you give it to them, and when they need it, they pull it out of their purse and they use it. So that, I think that's useful in thinking about, like, how they might be looking at congregations. Like, we're going to take it when we need it, but if we don't need it, it isn't like we're fully in. So that, I mean, I think that complements it. And then the question becomes, like, is it the best, is it okay to be an accessory? And I know you guys, you're here, you're on this talk, it's the middle of the day, I know, whatever. You're like, no, we are taking this really, you personally are taking this really seriously. And so I think there is a little bit of that conflict there. Like, you have people that are very, very committed to this, and then working with people who are like, I just want a little bit, that I can see that tension, and the goals might be a little misaligned. I don't know what to do with that, because it seems like religion should be a sort of all in sort of thing to me. That's what I kind of thought it was. But I don't know when the goals are misaligned where you go.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you mentioned early on in your presentation the ministry of accompaniment, right? We meet people where they are. So it's very smart to know where people are if you're going to meet them. And if you're hearing that, and you're talking about some of the religiously affiliated, some of the more religiously affiliated
Yeah, yeah, there's
families,
more. That's right, Jill.
than the normative of culture. And these folks only see religion mostly as an accessory that can be sort of added and pulled out when needed, and not something that is the grounding of their whole life and how they interact with others throughout the week, anytime. That's a really different starting point. So that to me is a ponderous takeaway for us, thinking through how to be with these parents who want this to be a part of their kid's life, not their whole life, and who want it to be ever present for them, and yet more as an add-on than as the root. That's a very interesting thing for us to wonder about. And I wonder if the kids, and as you said, parents are always looking back to how they were raised to ponder this stuff, right? I am very curious when these children become adults, what kind of parents they will be for their own children. Will they embrace wholeheartedly the idea that, no, this is actually the root of it all. This is who we are created to be, as beloved children created for the purpose of goodness and love and justice in this world? Or is it something that they sort of continue on in the same parents' footsteps of, this is a nice to do, but this isn't a something that really changes everything about me? That's just very, very interesting. So thank you for that.